Hi everyone, in today's video I'm going to talk through how I went at the January Factorum Grand Tournament in Warminster, UK. The 5-game event was run by the blokes at Deployment Zone Television, and it was a great event that had a relaxed but competitive feel to it. I took my 2000 point Astra Militarum list, which I've spoken about in this video here, but quickly it's got 3 Demolisher Tank Commanders Triple Flamers, 5 Infantry Squads, a Scion Squad, 2 4-man Bulgrim Squads, a Platoon Commander as Warlord, a Plasma Special Weapon Squad, 2 full payload Manticores, 2 Scout Sentinels, 2 Chimera Transports, and Inquisitor Eisenhorn for his psychic outputs. Regimental doctrines used were gunnery experts and spotter details. So across the 5 games I managed to play 4 against Space Marines with a final against Chaos World Eaters, so call it 5, albeit the last one against 1 wound Space Marines. The lists were a balanced Black Templars list, a shooty but stabby Blood Angels list with 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, a Salamander list with 14 MSUs, and that stands for minimum size units, a Dark Angels list with 30 odd Terminators and 2 Land Speeders including a Raven Wing Talonmaster, and finally the World Eaters list that had boatloads of Berserkers, 3 Dreadnoughts, Terminators, 2 Rhinos and 2 Dreadclaw drop plods that once deployed would move around the battlefield like a blender, causing strength 12, AP-4, flat 3 damage. Across the 5 games I managed to only go first once, and that was in the 2nd game against Blood Angels. Not to make excuses, but given where Astra Militarum in the meta, not going first can really put you on the back foot from the start. The first game against Black Templars was playing the mission Overrun with its top to bottom deployment, and 6 objective markers. Secondaries I took were Razor Banners High, Engage All Fronts and to the last on my 3 Tank Commanders. My opponent took Retrieve Octarius Data, Assassinate and the Space Marine secondary Oath of Moments, rewarding him for destroying a vehicle, not having a unit fallback or fail a morale test, and having a unit within 6 inches of the battlefield centre. Ended up being a very close game, with an early key moment being when I blasted an Intercessor squad off one of my opponent's objectives, meaning he lost it and he had to deploy and dedicate his jump pack veterans to holding it. Taking to the last in this case was risky, given he had a Devastator squad of las cannons and an Eradicator squad. I learnt that having a Primaris Apothecary means that you have to completely destroy an enemy unit. Otherwise the Apothecary is automatically bringing back up a slain model, as long as 1 model in that unit remains. A fun moment was when one of my tank commanders exploded, dealing out 7 mortal wounds to surrounding units, and consequently the last tank commander zoomed away to safety to preserve 5 to the last points. Razor Banners worked out to be a good choice in this game, and so did Engage All Fronts, with the Scout Sentinels and Scion squads proving vital to securing these both. The Manticores did plenty of work, thanks to gunnery experts and the tank commanders giving the reroll ones to hit. Whilst the 2 Bulgrim squads got in the way and even managed to kill 1 or 2 Space Marines. So scores on the board were 85 to me, with my opponent scoring 80. I scored 45 on primaries, 13 on banners, 12 on engage and 5 onto the last. Whilst my opponent scored 35 on primaries, 8 on retrieve Octarius Data, 12 on assassinate and 15 on Oath of Moments. Feeling good, game 2 was against Blood Angels, and I knew I was in for a tough time given the mission sweep and clear, with its shorter distance between deployment zones. I took Retrieve Octarius Data, Engage All Fronts and Mental Interrogation. I dropped to the last as I kinda knew my opponent would be chopping his way through my list. He took Retrieve Octarius Data, Oath of Moments again, and Assassinate. Now I thought about it, having 3 tank commanders is a bit of a giveaway for Assassinate, as I need to actually play them quite aggressively to get the Demolisher cannons into the fight. As I said earlier, I actually got first turn in this game and tried to clear off an Incursor squad sitting on an objective. My opponent then threw down the stratagem Transhuman Physiology, meaning I could only wound on a 4+, and also the stratagem Smokescreen, giving them a -1 to hit. I stubbornly ploughed both Manticores into the squad, killing only 4 of the 5 and leaving a single Spaceman on the objective. I then left him alone in a subsequent shooting phase, only to discover that for 1 CP, they can be whisked away into reinforcements via the stratagem Guerrilla Tactics. My opponent would later redeploy this single model into a table quarter to score maximum Retrieve Octarius data points. Until this tournament, I'd hardly played Space Marines in years, and soon discovered the relentless accuracy of them. Both of the Redemptor Dreadnoughts were hitting on twos thanks to Chapter Doctrines and Librarian spells, and their Plasma Incinerators were very strong when supercharged at Strength 9 AP-4 flat through damage, which makes an Executioner Plasma Cannon on a Leman Russ feel very underpowered. I didn't feed enough units into a table quarter, and he effectively screened out my Scions, meaning I couldn't score my 4th Retriever Octarius data. I was glad I took Mental Interrogation on Einarson, as I scored 8 points on it, when to the last would have given me 0, considering he tabled me on his last turn. I felt simply outclassed in this matchup, given his army was very shooty and also very stabby given their Blood Angels. Final scores were a modest 65 to me and 92 to my opponent. I scored 30 on primaries, 8 on Retrieve Octarius data, 9 on Engage and 8 on Mental Interrogation. My opponent scored 40 on primaries, 12 on Retrieve Octarius data, 15 on Oath of Moments and 15 on Assassinate. So from there, I then played the next along in the Space Marine paint palette against Salamanders. My opponent fielded a ton of multiple smaller units, and I knew nothing about Salamanders except that they liked Flamers and Melters. The mission was Vital Intelligence, and here the wheels fell off the wagon. Firstly, I took the wrong secondaries, being Razor Banners High and the mission-specific Data Intercept, which further rewards you for holding objectives. My opponent's list had both Infiltrators and Eliminators, meaning pre-game they were sitting on objectives, removing any chance of me getting a lot of points out of banners. Also, the tournament terrain was set up in a way that vehicles were pretty limited in how they could move, and I mistakenly managed to squeeze in 2 tank commanders and a Manticore into a rear corner. Turn 1 to my opponent saw him hold 5 objectives, and I really struggled to steal them back off him, as I really only had infantry squads to do so. My Bograms did their job, getting in the way of an advancing Dreadnought and 2 squads of Blade Guard veterans, but they could have probably been better used fighting for objectives. To the last hemmed me in and really limited how I moved the tank commanders, when they should have been moving around applying pressure to my opponent. Now I think about it, a better secondary to take could have been Warp Ritual, protecting Eisenhorn with the tank commanders and infantry squads. I also should have taken Retrieve Octarius data and Engage all fronts, which probably would have given me at minimum 8 and 10 points, respectively. However, final points were a dismal 48 to me, versus my opponent score at 84, with him getting 45 on primaries, 11 on Razor Banners High, 8 on Data Intercept and 10 on Assassinate. So in that game, I failed to understand my opponent's list, the terrain and the secondaries to support a playstyle that would have made it easy for my list to win. Some tough but valuable lessons for me there. Okay, game 4 was against another shade of green, being the Dark Angels. My opponent's list was comprised of nearly all Terminators, a Dreadnought, 2 Landspeeders with the Raven Wing Talonmaster with some shonky bodyguard rules, which were pretty frustrating and very cheesy to play against. The mission was priority target and perfectly suited my opponent's list playstyle. The mission's secondary being priority target, we both took, and I took Retrieve Octarius data and Engage all fronts. My opponent took also, again, Oath of Moment and Grind them down. I went second, and my opponent then basically spent the entire game holding his home objective and the center one, and us fighting out for the 2 other objectives. His army doctrine meant all of the Terminators would be getting wounded on a 4+, so sucking the life out of my Demolishers and Manticores, and also those with Storm Shields had a 4+ invul save. This game ended up relatively close, as I was able to outmaneuver him and actually contest one of the outlying objectives. Not taking to the last, I gave him the freedom to get my Leman Russes in the mix, but ultimately what lost me the game was that I couldn't max my secondaries. As you know, Retrieve Octarius data scores a maximum of 12 victory points, and Engage all fronts would require you to be in all 4 table quarters from turn 1 to give you 15 victory points. I scored 12 on Retrieve Octarius data, 10 on Engage all fronts, whilst my opponent scored 15 on Oath of Moments, 12 on Grind them down, and we both scored 15 on priority target. Final scores were 87 to me and 97 to my opponent. Looking back at it, I may have been able to dominate the centre objective with Leman Russes and Chimera's with Bograms inside. However, I figured that would be doing what my opponent wanted, given the Terminators all had Thunderhammers and Lightning Claws. I could have also denied him some Grind them down points, but that would have required some very cagey play, hiding infantry squads away, and near impossible given I think I killed about a grand total of 3 or 4 of his units. Overall though, I was happy with how this game played out. I do like to think that when all our weapons get buffed in the new codex, I may have been able to more effectively kill off all his Terminators. Time will tell. My fifth and final game was against some sweet looking Word Bearers. We played Retrieval Mission, which favours shooty armies due to the longer distance between deployment zones. I opted for Razor Banners High, Engage all fronts and to the last, whilst my opponent took Bring It Down, Engage all fronts and Grind them down. My opponent went first, and he got in 2 turn 1 charges, having dropped in his Dreadcore drop pod and disembarked his Berserkers. Here I didn't practice what I preach, setting back an infantry squad an inch from a terrain piece, with them actually touching an objective. Thinking about it now, there is no need to have units actually on an objective, given you obviously don't score primaries in turn 1. If I had the infantry squad further back, it would have prevented the charge, given the Dreadclaw wouldn't have been able to fit on the terrain piece. I did manage to clear off most of the enemy charges with the Demolishers and Triple Flamers, mincing the 1 wound Word Bearers. I did however struggle to get into his table half, and only scored Engage thanks to my Scion squad and Sentinels. I've already revised my list a bit to have a 3rd Sentinel and 2 Scion squads. Razor Banners High in this game wasn't right again, as I struggled to keep my opponent back due to his first turn and also his deep striking units. Retrieve Octarius Data would have been a much better pick in this game again. So final points were 71 to me and 88 to my opponent. I scored 35 on primaries, 6 on Razor Banners, 10 on Engage on fronts and 10 on to the last. My opponent scored 45 on primaries, 13 on Engage, 8 on Bring It Down, on 12 on Grind It Down. I was bummed by this game as I gave away the turn 1 charge which shut down one of my Manticores and hemmed in my right flank. I couldn't blame the loss on an 8th edition codex, given World Eaters are still also on an 8th edition codex. It's all down to poor decision making by me. Bummer. Right, so overall I was happy with 3 of the games and annoyed at my secondary selection in the Salamander game and decision making against the Word Bearers. I should have always simply have stuck with Engage all fronts and Retrieve Octarius Data. Unless you're playing a hyper defensive shooty army, Razor Banners High is hyper risky. With the new chapter approved 2020 and the revision to secondaries, I've already tuned this list a bit more. Having played my first chapter approved 2022 game last night, I think Guard will be fine overall. That's not to say we'll necessarily find it easier, more that we won't be disadvantaged by the changes. We ultimately need a new codex, and I like to think that when it's released, I'll suddenly start to win a lot more games. I consistently always score quite well, and over the last 10 games or so, I haven't been thoroughly beaten except against the Salamanders where I got properly spanked. If you've been following my progress for a while, you'll know I'm not the most talented player, however I'm stubbornly determined to get better and better. I'm a big believer in that often the slowest learners are the best learners. So enough of the heart-to-heart. Hope you enjoyed the video, and as always if you want to support the channel, I've got a Patreon Platoon and a YouTube membership. But simply by you watching, liking, subscribing or sharing this video, it really helps. Thanks for watching. Patreon Platoon, sound off. Tank Commander Watchdog Van Etten, Lieutenant Mitchell, Colour Sergeant DuPont, Sergeants Brady, Adal, Gilliam, Merrill, Veterans Gibson, Hall, Lundeen, Witten, Guardsman Combs, Glenn, Hills, Nitton, Nguyen, Smith, Tom, Tompkin.